Are you a crappy partner, crappy wife, crappy husband, crappy mate? This podcast is for you. Give yourself the gift of self-awareness. Learn new skills. Take the time to assess your partnership, marriage, relationship, etc. So how are we going to do this? Start by taking the Crappy Mate quiz. The quiz can be found on our website, www.crappymate.com, on Pinterest, Crappy Mate, Instagram and Facebook, Crappy Mate Podcast. We will dedicate episodes to discussing the quiz topics. In further episodes, we will be exploring common problems, the speed bumps that occur in relationships. Also, we will introduce time-tested skills and helpful hints to enhance your relationship, and we invite you, our listeners, to contribute your thoughts, questions, or concerns regarding relationships. Welcome to the Crappy Mate Podcast. I'm Dr. Richard Vance Barnes, MD. I'm a board-certified general psychiatrist with 25 plus years in psychiatry. I have treated patients in a variety of settings, both inpatient units, outpatient units, partial hospitalization units, as well as detoxification programs and rehabilitation programs. And I've had a private practice for many, many years.
And I'm Barbara Quaid, a marriage and family therapist. I also have over 25 years experience working with families, individuals, and couples. And my life as a therapist has been both humbling and joyful. Before we get started, I'd just like to talk about our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy, and as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
The Crappy Mate podcast was developed out of hearing years and years of stories and accounts from patients in therapy about their mates and themselves actually being crappy mates and poorly behaving within the relationship. And so this concept was then developed into a podcast of how can we help people to actually improve upon their relationships.
And so in order to do this, we developed a quiz. And the quiz, we really thought about some concepts that we thought were important in a relationship. And so the Crappy Mate quiz ended up being a 10-question self-scoring assessment that can be found on our Facebook page. And our Facebook page is aptly named The Crappy Mate Podcast. And along with the quiz, you will find a glossary with the terms we used both in the podcast and on the quiz. And this is so we can all be on the same page. Now, to score the quiz, you will read each question carefully and then ask yourself, do I do this almost always, sometimes, or almost never? And when we thought about this, the scoring is like this. Almost always is worth 3 points. Sometimes 2 points. And almost never 1 point. So once you have your total points, you add them up. And a score of 10 to 17 clearly indicates that one needs improvement. A score of 17 to 24, one has a degree of awareness, but improvement can still be beneficial. And a score of 24 to 30, one is aware, insightful, and acting in a positive manner as it pertains to the relationship.
Well, welcome to the Crappy Mate podcast today. We wanted to continue in this episode with part 2 on fair fighting rules for couples. And specifically, we wanted to look at the items more closely in the fighting rules for couples, mates, partners, etc., spouses. So let's review the rules just briefly, Barbara.
Okay, so our rule number 1 was to stick to the issue at hand. And that means staying with it, being in the present, not bringing up old stuff, which was your kitchen sink fighting where everybody brings stuff up.
Yes, we want to avoid that. We don't want you to throw all these past issues into the sink to fight and to hurl at your mate.
And number 2 is refrain from name calling, either directly or indirectly. No saying that that was really dumb or really stupid. Number 3 was no yelling, screaming, cursing, or any type of physical aggression, to include, of course, physical abuse, which is strictly prohibited.
So let me just be clear with our listeners on that. If you take your partner's phone, you throw it against the wall, that's abusive. Would you agree with that?
Totally agree. It's intimidating. It's destroying property, somebody else's property in this case, but even if it's your own property, it's intimidating.
Just briefly on this, I had a patient who actually took his girlfriend's phone, and during a heated argument, he grabbed the phone and he threw it against the wall, and it cracked in a number of pieces and glass was shattered everywhere. About an hour later, he was arrested by the police after she had summoned the police to the home.
Well, and I think you have to look at local laws. I know the law in our state and in our county is very clear. If the police or the sheriff's office are called to a domestic violence in a home, somebody has to be arrested. And the whole idea, I think, in this case is not to necessarily get to the bottom of who did what, when, but to separate the two people.
Yes, I would agree with that. And so in those heated moments, yes, the police will come in and someone will have to leave.
Someone will be arrested. And
yes.
Like you said, it's breaking something. It's any of these kinds of aggressive acts.
Yes.
So number 4 is in the midst of arguing, we can call for a timeout. And the timeout is really for us to process everything that's gone on, to think about our part in it, to think about our partner's part. But we have to agree upon this beforehand. I can't just in the middle of a heated argument say, I need a timeout. I think we have to, some part in our lives, we've talked about it and say, if things get heated, we need to take timeouts.
I think that's really important to me, the most important aspect of that is to agree upon the time and agree upon the fact that we will need this time. So I think any kind of preparation beforehand, and I would want our listeners to really practice these rules before they got into any heated verbal fisticuffs. So I think it is important to be able to have it clearly in mind. Okay, if things go awry, we're going to take an hour. We're going to take 2 hours. Whatever we agree upon, we're going to take that time out to individually process and think about my actions, about my partner's actions, and about how we can resolve these things.
So that leads us to the most important part of this, which is how to resolve the conflict. And that means coming back together.
Yes, the most important aspect to this really is the resolution and coming back. And it has to be done in a very sensitive way, I believe, that will bring about the effectiveness of this particular act. And that is to, when you take the time to separate from your partner, your mate, your spouse, etc., to think about the issue that's at hand. Well, what you want to do is you want to think not only about your role in this, but think about your partner's role and how they may be feeling hearing your issues, hearing your disagreements, hearing your strong points that you are standing by in this disagreement. And so it's very, very important when you are processing to have a really open mind, to look at things as objectively as you can, and to really look at your partner's role in terms of how emotionally they may be feeling with this argument.
So it's their role, but also the intent behind it. Why is this person so upset? What happened? And so I think if we can think about that and try to put ourselves in the other person's position, we really can help to resolve it.
I think that's going to be the real key, in my opinion, is to be able to walk in your partner's shoes and to be able to feel what they're feeling and be able to understand from their perspective why they may be feeling hurt or may be feeling pain or feeling disillusioned in terms of what is happening. And so this is the way it should actually present when you come back together. And let me just show you an example of this. And so we've taken time, let's say, to individually process what's been going on and in terms of what we're upset about. And so when I come back together, and for this particular situation, you are going to be my mate, and I'm going to say, so let me see, Barbara, let me see if I understand completely about why you were so upset with things. Okay, you were upset because I didn't actually do the action that you wanted me to. Instead, I acted upon in a way that led to a different outcome. And obviously you were not happy with the way I acted and you were disturbed with that. Am I correct in believing why you were so upset with me?
Yeah, I think you've got that. That's exactly what happened.
Okay.
So let's just stop it right there, freeze frame. And what you did is you thought about it and you presented my position. And then you asked very tentatively, did I get this right? Which allowed for me to say yes or no. And what I felt when you did that was listened to.
Yes, and that's the point that I'm trying to get our listeners to really hone in on. And that is, you want to show your partner that you have been listening, that you care enough to listen, and that you're concerned with their feelings and their thoughts on this issue. Now, you may not agree, and obviously you don't, and that's why there's controversy at this point. But when you come back together after you've processed your thoughts, you must be able to show this respect, because it will really help to simmer and break down the argument, and it'll bring you closer together. And it really will show that you care enough to listen to what they had to say to you.
And what it shows me is that you are thinking about my position and not only your own position. And so that's what we really need to do. We're trying to restate what the other's position is, which is not to say that we just give up on our own position. That comes later. But the first part is to restate what we think our partner is trying to tell us.
Yes, very, very important, because, again, mutual respect and resolution of your conflict is how you stay together long term. So respect. We want to show our partner that we respect their feelings, that we understand why they were disturbed with us. And we do that by not putting our needs first, by putting their needs first, by asking, is this why you were so disturbed with me?
This takes a lot of emotional intelligence. And what that means is we have to be thinking about the emotions behind the words.
Yes.
Our own and our partner's. And so it behooves us to really think about what's going on.
Yes, it does. And I would say that we have to really be careful with not allowing our anger and our emotions to override our ability to process and to be more sensitive in terms of what our partner's needs may be at the time.
I like that. And it's really about giving ourselves time to think and time. I think the more time you give yourself to think about things, you have more choices in acting instead of just reacting. And that's the difference. It's acting versus reacting.
Let's talk about anger for just a moment, because I feel that I've met so many people through my career that believe that if they get angry over something, they feel more powerful and that they feel like they have more control of the situation or their emotions. And my contention has always been that no, when you get angry, you're giving up your power. You're giving up your ability to be more rational, and you're giving up your ability to think in a sensitive way that may resolve the conflict itself. So anger to me is not a true emotion. I always feel that anger is a cover for something else. It could be for feeling inadequate. It could be representing a way to cover up my own feelings of guilt or feelings of shame, etc., whatever it is. But I don't really feel that anger is a true emotion. And that's why in these fighting rules, I would like to really find a way for people to challenge themselves not to use anger as a way to feel like they're empowered by it.
Well, and I think there's some people who would say, I just lost all control. What do you say to that?
Well, again, I'm of the belief that unless you are psychotic and you don't have control of your mind, well, we have an opportunity to decide how we're going to feel. It's a choice on our part. And anger, to use it in an argument or to use it as a way to bolster yourself during an argument, well, that's a choice. It's really a choice. And so even though it may feel like it's automatic, that I'm going to get angry automatically and I have no control, you really do. And one of the things I try to teach my patients is to step back for a few minutes mentally. Take a 10-second break, a delay in responding. And when you do that, it'll give you a chance to process in a way that you can make a better choice. Can I say this in a way that's not going to be angry, going to be antagonistic?
I like that. And I think when we act out, because I would say that any of these things are acting out, showing a lot of anger, yelling, screaming, all of that. It's very primitive. And what's one of the things we teach our children? We don't like them when they're having a tantrum. And the first thing we teach them is to be able to calm themselves down. So it's self-calming. And then we teach them to use their words.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Use your words. Yes, exactly. So, and I love the fact that you identified the primitive nature of that, because it really is primitive. And it reminds me of years ago, there used to be sandboxes in New York City, and kids would go and play in their sandbox, and parents would deposit their kids into the sandbox, and you'd have your toys and you would play there. Well, when you got upset with someone, you would grab your shovel, you would grab your truck or what have you, your pail, and you'd just leave the sandbox. You'd just walk away. You'd get angry and you would just leave. And that would be it. And that was a very primitive way of handling your disagreement. And it was a very primitive way of displaying how you could resolve your conflict. So we don't want people to really go back to those times when they were small children and they would just get angry and leave the sandbox. No, we want people to be able to process in a way and to resolve their conflicts by also being sensitive mostly to their partner's needs.
And in a committed relationship, we believe that both of us are going to grow. And so if we have these more primitive outbursts, we can learn to do something with them and make them to argue more productively and in a way that helps not only our own self-growth, but the growth of ourselves as a couple.
I think that's wonderful to think about it in terms of that. But I also would have to say that every time that you resolve your conflict from a disagreement or an argument, I believe you're growing and you're learning. And you're learning that, yes, we can go through these heated verbal fisticuffs, but we also can come out of these fisticuffs intact, and our partners can come out intact, and together we will have grown from the adversity.
And learning more about your partner.
And learning more.
Because it really is about emotional intelligence, and it's our own understanding our own emotions, but understanding the emotions of the other.
Yes.
And then you'll be able to relate to the other more kindly and compassionately.
And I think that you make a great point, because I think ultimately what we want to do is we want to deepen our love for one another. We want to deepen the commitments that we have for one another. And we want to prove and show that this is something that we can sustain and that's going to be always present for the relationship. So I think it's really important to get to that safe zone, that common ground where you can resolve these things, but you can have these disagreements and follow the rules to resolve your conflict.
I like that.
So with that, let's just go over our helpful hints for today's episode. And if you would do that for us, Barbara.
Well, our helpful hints are really the fighting rules for couples. And again, they're stick to the issues at hand, number 1. 2, refrain from name calling. 3, no yelling, screaming, cursing, or any kind of physical aggression or abuse. And then allow for time out and individually processing what has gone on. And like we talked about before, that timeout should be agreed upon beforehand. And then the big part of this, the capstone to all of this, is the coming together. And the coming together means that we restate the partner's position. And
First off,
that's number 1. We validate his or her position. And then your partner will do this for you.
I think that's wonderful, and I hope that these helpful hints will really help people to get to a point where they can have their disagreements, but they know that they have a set of ground rules to follow so that they can deepen their love and avoid resentments.
Thank you.
In closing the podcast today, I just want to remind our listeners of our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy. And as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
Thank you for listening to the Crappy Mate podcast. We invite you to submit comments, questions, and/or concerns about today's podcast, or give us feedback on relationship topics you'd like to hear covered. We encourage you to try our helpful hints. Give these a go, try them on for size. Remember, you can follow us on our Facebook and Instagram pages under the Crappy Mate podcast. Our website is www.crappymate.com. And please be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening.